The wind howled through the towering pines surrounding Blackwood Pine Resort, their skeletal branches clawing at the night sky. Victoria Grant stood on the balcony of her family's once grand hotel, her fingers tightening around the rusted railing. Below her, the empty pool reflected the pale moonlight, its cracked tiles and murky water a testament to better days long gone. She didn't need to turn around to know Jamie was watching her. The girl had a habit of lingering in doorways, her skepticism as thick as the mountain fog. "You imagining things," Jamie said, stepping onto the balcony with a mug of coffee in hand. Steam curled into the cold air between them. "The resort's old. Of course it creaks." Victoria didn't answer. Her gaze was fixed on the tree line, where the shadows seemed to shift without reason. She had seen it again tonight, the flicker of movement where nothing should have been moving. "They're watching us," she murmured. Jamie sighed, rubbing her arms against the chill. "You've been saying that for weeks. Maybe you should—" A branch snapped in the woods. Both women went still. Victoria's breath came shallow, her pulse a frantic drumbeat in her throat. She knew that sound. It wasn't an animal. Animals didn't step that carefully. Jamie, ever the pragmatist, leaned over the railing. Probably just a deer. But Victoria was already moving, grabbing Jamie's wrist and pulling her back inside. The door slammed behind them, the lock clicking into place with a finality that did nothing to ease the dread coiling in Victoria's stomach. "You don't understand," she whispered, her voice raw. "It started when he arrived." Jamie frowned. "Edward Carver?" Victoria's silence was answer enough. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows like something trying to get in. Somewhere in the distance, a lone wolf howled, a sound that hadn't been heard in Blackwood Pine for years. Jamie crossed her arms, but for the first time uncertainty flickered in her eyes. "You really think he's behind all this?" Victoria turned away, her reflection ghostly in the dark glass. "I think he's the reason the twisted pine is awake again. And in the woods beyond the resort, something watched and waited." The elevator doors slid open with a hushed whisper, revealing the penthouse suite in all its gilded splendor. Edward Carver stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows, his back to the entrance, watching as the first snow of winter dusted the mountains beyond Blackwood Pine. The amber glow of his whiskey caught the fading afternoon light, casting liquid gold shadows across his sharp features. "You're late," he said without turning. Marcus, his beta, stepped off the elevator and smoothed his tie. "The roads are already icing over. You should have seen the mess in town. Some tourist skidded his BMW right into the general store's front window." Edward's mouth twitched. "Let me guess. Another city boy who thought all-wheel drive made him invincible?" He finally turned, his ice-blue eyes scanning the documents in Marcus's hands. "Did she sign?" Marcus hesitated, the leather portfolio suddenly heavy in his grip. "Not exactly." The silence that followed was more biting than the winter wind howling outside. Edward set his glass down with deliberate precision, the crystal ringing like a funeral bell against the marble countertop. "Explain." "Victoria Grant is stubborn," Marcus said, choosing his words carefully. "She refused to even look at our revised offer, just tore up the papers and told me to—" "To what?" Edward's voice dropped to a dangerous purr. Marcus cleared his throat. "To tell you to go to hell, sir." A slow smile spread across Edward's face, the kind that made even seasoned wolves take a step back. "Did she now?" He crossed the room, his dress shoes sinking into the plush Persian rug. I do love it when they fight back. Makes the victory sweeter. He stopped at a side table where a scale model of Blackwood Pine Resort stood, a perfect miniature replica down to the last shingle. Edward traced a finger along the tiny rooftop, his nail catching on the model's clock tower. "She'll sell," he murmured. "They always do in the end." Marcus shifted his weight. "There's more. She's hired someone new, a events manager, some girl from out of town." Edward's fingers stilled. "Girl? Jamie Monroe? Early 20s? No family connections, no pack affiliations." Marcus flipped open the portfolio to reveal a grainy surveillance photo of a young woman with wild auburn hair, caught mid-laugh as she carried a box of decorations into the resort. "Seems harmless enough." Edward studied the photo, his thumb brushing over the image. The girl's smile was like sunlight breaking through storm clouds, bright, unexpected, and utterly out of place in the crumbling grandeur of Blackwood Pine. "Everyone's harmless," he said softly, "until they're not." Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the balcony doors. Somewhere in the distance a lone wolf howled, a sound that hadn't been heard in these woods for generations. Edward closed the portfolio with a snap. "Double our surveillance. I want to know everyone who comes and goes from that resort." His gaze drifted back to the model, to the tiny replica of the twisted pine tree that stood at the property's edge. "And Marcus?" "Yes, Alpha? Keep an eye on the Monroe girl." His lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. "I have a feeling she's going to be interesting." Down in the valley, lights flickered in the resort's windows as Jamie carried another box through the lobby, completely unaware of the storm gathering around her, both the one outside and the one watching from the penthouse above. Jamie's boots crunched through the thin layer of frost as she made her way down the overgrown path behind the resort. The morning air burned her lungs with each breath, sharp and clean with the promise of winter. She shifted the box of old decorations in her arms, the cardboard damp against her sweater. The storage shed loomed ahead, its peeling red paint barely visible beneath decades of ivy. Jamie fumbled with the rusted padlock, her numb fingers struggling with the key. "Come on, you stupid thing," she muttered, blowing a strand of hair out of her face. The lock finally gave with a reluctant click. The door groaned open, revealing a cavern of forgotten resort history. Dust-covered chairs, broken skis, and boxes upon boxes of yellowing paperwork. Jamie wrinkled her nose at the musty smell as she stepped inside. Something crunched underfoot. She looked down to find shards of broken mirror scattered across the floor. Odd. Kneeling, she picked up a larger piece, her reflection warped in its surface. The glass was cold against her skin, too cold for an unheated shed. A whisper of movement made her head snap up. The shadows at the back of the shed shifted. Jamie's breath caught in her throat as two pinpricks of light appeared in the darkness, eyes reflecting the dim morning glow. "Hello?" Her voice sounded small in the cramped space. The thing moved closer, its form resolving into a massive black wolf. Jamie froze as it stepped into the thin light, its coat gleaming like oil on water. It wasn't growling, wasn't threatening, just watching her with eerie intelligence. The mirror fragment slipped from her fingers, shattering on the floor. When she looked up again, the wolf was gone. Jamie scrambled to her feet, heart pounding. She backed toward the door, nearly tripping over a stack of old ledgers. That's when she saw it, a single black paw print, still wet, leading toward the back wall. Except there was no exit there, just solid wood. The sound of footsteps outside made her jump. "Jamie!" Victoria's voice called from the path. "Are you in there?" Jamie turned back the paw print, but it was gone. Only dust remained. She swallowed hard. "Comin'!" As she stepped back into the morning light, Jamie couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Up in the penthouse suite of the Blackwood Pine Hotel, Edward Carver lowered his binoculars, a slow smile spreading across his face. On his desk, a centuries-old ledger lay open to a yellowed page. At the top, in faded ink, were the words, "The guardian always returns when the twisted pine awakens." And beneath it, a crude drawing of a wolf with eyes like liquid gold. The annual winter gala was supposed to be the resort's saving grace, a final glittering spectacle to remind the town's elite why they'd once loved Blackwood Pine. Jamie stood in the middle of the transformed ballroom, watching as the last decorations crew packed up their ladders. She adjusted the silver garland draped across the mantelpiece, her fingers catching on stray pine needles. The entire room smelled of fresh evergreen and beeswax candles, with just the faintest undercurrent of mildew the cleaning crew hadn't quite managed to mask. "Miss Monroe?" Jamie turned to find one of the waitstaff holding out a clipboard. "We're short 3 cases of champagne. The delivery driver insists he brought everything on the manifest." Jamie sighed and tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear. "Check the service elevator. Last year they left half the linen stuck between floors." As the waiter hurried off, Jamie's gaze drifted to the massive clock above the entrance. 5:47 p.m. Guests would start arriving in little over an hour, and Victoria was nowhere to be seen. The ballroom doors swung open with a bang. Edward Carver stood framed in the doorway, his black overcoat dusted with snow. He surveyed the room with a predator's gaze, taking in every detail from the freshly polished chandeliers to the nervous staff scattering out of his path. Jamie's stomach tightened as those ice-blue eyes landed on her. "Mr. Carver," she said, forcing professionalism into her voice, "the gala doesn't begin until 7. He stepped inside, his leather gloves creaking as he removed them one finger at a time. "I'm aware." Snow melted from his shoulders, darkening the wool. "I came to inspect the premises before the festivities." Jamie crossed her arms. "There's nothing to inspect. Everything's been approved by the fire marshal and health department." Edward's mouth quirked as he approached, his polished Oxfords clicking against the marble floor. He stopped just inside her personal space, close enough that she caught the scent of bergamot and something darker beneath, like a winter forest at midnight. "You misunderstand me, Miss Monroe," he murmured. "I didn't come to inspect the decorations." His gaze traveled slowly down her body, taking in her simple black dress and sensible heels. "Though you do clean up remarkably well." Heat rushed to Jamie's face. "If you're here to intimidate me into convincing Victoria to sell—" Edward plucked a stray pine needle from her sleeve. "I'm here because I was invited." He produced a cream-colored envelope from his coat pocket, the Carver family crest embossed in silver wax. "Your employer sent this herself." Jamie stared at the invitation. Victoria hadn't mentioned this, hadn't mentioned anything about Edward attending tonight. A crash echoed from the kitchen, followed by shouted apologies. Edward didn't flinch, his attention fixed on Jamie's face with unsettling intensity. "Tell me," he said, tilting his head, "does Victoria often keep you in the dark about her plans?" Before Jamie could respond, the lights flickered. A collective gasp rose from the staff as the chandeliers dimmed, then brightened again. Edward's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Old wiring," he said, "among other things." Outside, the wind howled against the windows, rattling the glass in its frames. Somewhere in the distance, a wolf's cry split the twilight, a sound that shouldn't exist this close to civilization. Jamie rubbed her arms, suddenly chilled. "You should go. We have preparations to finish." Edward stepped closer, his breath warm against her ear. "I'll be watching you tonight, Jamie Monroe," he whispered. "Every graceful step, every charming smile." His gloved hand brushed her waist as he passed. "Try not to disappoint." The ballroom doors swung shut behind him, leaving Jamie alone with the creeping certainty that tonight's gala would be about far more than saving a failing resort. Up in the rafters, unnoticed by any of the staff, a single black feather drifted down to land silently on the polished dance floor. The first guests arrived precisely at 7. Their expensive perfumes and colognes mingling with the scent of pine and burning wax. Jamie stood near the entrance, forcing a smile as she greeted each new arrival. The women glittered in diamonds and designer gowns, their laughter too loud, their eyes too sharp as they assessed the resort's faded grandeur. A hand closed around Jamie's elbow. "You look like you're about to bolt for the nearest exit." Jamie turned to find Marcus, Edward's beta, offering her a champagne flute. His dark hair was slicked back, the formal suit doing little to soften his soldier's posture. She accepted the glass with a stiff nod. "Just doing my job." Marcus's gaze tracked across the room to where Edward held court near the fireplace, surrounded by local business owners hanging on his every word. "He's impressed with you, you know." The champagne turned bitter on Jamie's tongue. "I can't imagine why." Before Marcus could respond, the string quartet in the corner faltered. A hush fell over the ballroom as Victoria made her entrance at the top of the grand staircase. She was a vision in emerald silk, her dark hair swept into an elegant chignon. But it was the necklace that caught Jamie's breath, an antique silver pendant shaped like a twisted pine tree, its branches curling around a single black stone. Marcus stiffened beside her. "Where did she get that?" Jamie had no chance to answer. Victoria descended like a queen, her smile razor-sharp as she approached Edward's circle. The crowd parted instinctively, conversations dying mid-sentence. "Mr. Carver," Victoria purred, extending her hand. "How unexpected to see you here." Edward took her fingers, bowing just enough to be polite without sincerity. The invitation was quite clear. His gaze flicked to the pendant. "That's an interesting piece." Victoria's fingers rose to touch the silver pine, a family heirloom, one of many secrets this old place keeps. Her eyes found Jamie across the room. "Isn't that right, dear?" All attention swung to Jamie. She felt the weight of Edward's stare like a physical touch, the intensity making her palms sweat. The lights flickered again, more violently this time. Several guests gasped as the chandeliers dimmed to near darkness. Then the screaming started. Near the dessert table, a woman clutched her throat, her champagne flute shattering on the floor. "Something's in here!" she shrieked. "Something!" A blur of black streaked across the ballroom. Glasses toppled, a tablecloth ripped free as something massive moved beneath it. Chaos erupted. Jamie found herself pressed against a pillar, her heart hammering against her ribs. Through the panicked crowd, she saw Edward standing perfectly still, his head tilted as if listening to a sound no one else could hear. Then their eyes met. He moved with preternatural speed, shoving guests aside as he crossed the room. Jamie barely had time to register the heat of his body before he yanked her sideways, just as a crystal vase exploded where her head had been. "Stay close," Edward growled, his arm a steel band around her waist. Victoria's laughter rang out above the pandemonium. She stood untouched at the center of the storm, her fingers caressing the pine pendant. "You see, Mr. Carver, some forces can't be bought or bullied." The light surged back to full brightness. The ballroom was a disaster. Overturned tables, shattered glass, guests huddled in terrified clusters. But of the mysterious creature there was no sign, only a single black feather floating down from the rafters. Edward's grip tightened on Jamie. "You're coming with me," he murmured against her ear, "unless you want to find out what else your employer has hidden in these walls." As he led her toward the exit, Jamie glanced back. Victoria watched them go, her smile widening as she mouthed 2 words, "Run, Rabbit." Outside in the freezing night, Jamie realized 2 things simultaneously. The pendant around Victoria's neck was identical to the carvings on the twisted pine, and Edward's eyes in the moonlight weren't blue at all, but a luminous, impossible gold. The cold night air sliced through Jamie's thin dress as Edward half dragged her across the resort's rear courtyard. Her heels skidded on patches of black ice. Each stumble met with his iron grip tightening around her wrist. "Slow down," Jamie gasped, her breath forming white clouds in the moonlight. "Where are we?" Edward whirled on her so suddenly she collided with his chest. Up close, his golden eyes burned with an unnatural light. The pupils slitted like a cat's. "You're in danger," he snarled, "more than you can possibly understand." Behind them, the ballroom windows glowed yellow, shadows of panicked guests darting back and forth like moths. A shrill scream pierced the night, followed by the unmistakable sound of shattering glass. Jamie tried to pull free. "I need to go back." "No." Edward's voice dropped to a vibration that thrummed through her bones. "That thing in there wasn't after the guests. It was hunting you." Ice trickled down Jamie's spine. "That's impossible. I didn't do anything." "You exist." His fingers traced the curve of her throat, lingering over her racing pulse. "That's enough." A branch snapped in the nearby woods. Edward's head whipped toward the sound, his body tensing like a coiled spring. The moonlight caught the edges of his silhouette, and for a heartbeat, Jamie swore she saw something else, superimposed over him, something larger, with gleaming fangs and shadow-black fur. Then the moment passed, and he was just a man again. "Come." He tugged her toward a sleek black car idling near the service entrance. "We're leaving." Jamie planted her feet. "I'm not going anywhere with you." The growl that escaped Edward's throat wasn't human. It rolled through the frozen air like thunder, raising the hairs on Jamie's arms. Would you prefer to stay and become whatever just tore through that ballroom's next meal? Before she could answer, The courtyard floodlights exploded in a shower of sparks. Darkness swallowed them whole. Something moved in the blackness, a skittering, many-limbed shape scuttling along the resort stone walls. Jamie caught glimpses of it between the trees, too many joints, eyes that reflected light in jagged shards, a mouth that opened vertically like a nightmare puppet. Edward shoved her behind him. His body began to change, shoulders broadening, bones cracking audibly as his spine curved. "When I say run," he gritted out, between elongating teeth, "you run for the car and don't look back." The creature dropped from the roof with a wet thud. Jamie's scream lodged in her throat as it unfolded itself to full height, a grotesque parody of a wolf standing on too many legs, its matted fur dripping something black and viscous onto the snow. Edward's transformation halted abruptly when Jamie grabbed his arm. "Wait," she breathed. "Look at its collar." Around the creature's twisted neck hung a tarnished silver tag, barely visible beneath clumps of fur, the exact same twisted pine symbol from Victoria's pendant. Recognition flashed across Edward's face. "Oh, God, she's binding them!" The creature lunged. Edward met it mid-air with a snarl, his human form shredding away like tissue paper. Fur erupted across his skin, claws tore through his fingertips. Jamie stumbled back as two massive shapes collided in a whirl of teeth and shadows, snow spraying in crimson arcs. A guttural voice hissed from the darkness near her ear. "He can't protect you forever." Jamie spun to find Victoria standing inches away, her emerald dress untouched by the chaos. The pine pendant pulsed with sickly green light, casting her face in ghastly shadows. "What are you?" Jamie choked out. Victoria smiled, revealing teeth too sharp and numerous. "The rightful heir." Her hand shot out, ice-cold fingers clamping around Jamie's wrist. "And you're the key." A gunshot rang out. Victoria recoiled with a shriek as Marcus appeared from the trees, a smoking pistol in hand. "Jamie, now!" Jamie didn't hesitate. She sprinted toward Marcus as behind her, the night erupted in unearthly howls. The last thing she saw before diving into the car was Edward, fully transformed into a massive black wolf, locking jaws with the monstrosity beneath the blood-streaked moon. As the tires screeched against the icy pavement, Marcus tossed her a heavy wool blanket. His hands shook on the steering wheel. "You okay?" Jamie stared at the resort shrinking in the rearview mirror, at the shadows writhing in its windows. "No," she whispered. "I don't think any of us are." Somewhere in the dark, a pine tree's gnarled branches creaked in the wind, waiting. The car ride lasted forever and ended too soon. Jamie clutched the wool blanket around her shoulders, the scratchy fabric doing little to stop her shivering. Outside the tinted windows, the forest blurred into an endless black tunnel, punctuated by the occasional flash of moonlight on snow. Marcus hadn't spoken since they'd left the resort. His knuckles stayed white on the steering wheel, eyes constantly flicking to the rearview mirror. "Where are we going?" Jamie's voice sounded alien to her own ears, hoarse from screaming, trembling with leftover adrenaline. "Safe house." Marcus downshifted as the road steepened. Edward's orders. The mention of Edward's name sent an unwelcome pang through Jamie's chest. She squeezed her eyes shut, but the image burned behind her lids, the way his body had stretched and reformed, human features melting away to reveal something ancient and wild. A werewolf. The word should have felt ridiculous. Instead, it settled into her bones with dreadful certainty. The car slowed abruptly. Jamie opened her eyes to see Marcus leaning forward, squinting through the windshield. What the hell? Something stood in the road. At first glance it appeared to be a deer, tall and slender, silhouetted against the moonlit snow. Then it turned its head, and Jamie saw the antlers were too many, too twisted, forming a grotesque crown of bone. Marcus cursed and reached for the gun on the passenger seat. The creature moved. 1 second, it stood 20 feet ahead. The next, its elongated face pressed against Jamie's window, hot breath fogging the glass. She recoiled as a 2 long finger tapped against the window. Tap, tap, tap. Each impact leaving a smear of something black and viscous. Don't look at it. Marcus slammed the accelerator. The car lurched forward, tires spinning on ice before catching. Jamie twisted in her seat, watching as the creature receded into the darkness, then simply vanished between one blink and the next. Her hand shook violently. That wasn't normal. Marcus's laugh held no humor. Nothing about Blackwood Pine is normal, sweetheart. Not the resort, not the woods, and sure as hell not Victoria. He wiped sweat from his brow. Edward tried to warn you. Jamie turned the words over in her mind. He knew. This whole time he knew what she was. Not all of it. Marcus took a sharp turn onto an unmarked road. We knew the resort sat on powerful ley lines. Knew Victoria's family had been dabbling in things they shouldn't for generations. But this, he shook his head, binding spirits to physical forms? That's next-level dark magic. The safe house materialized from the trees, a modest log cabin with smoke curling from its chimney. Jamie expected guards, maybe more armed men like Marcus. Instead, the porch held only an elderly woman wrapped in a quilted shawl, her silver braid gleaming in the porch light. Marcus parked and let out a long breath. Thank God, she's still here. Who? Agnes, Edward's. Well, you'll see. The old woman studied Jamie with eyes that held too much knowing. When she spoke, her voice rasped like wind through dead leaves. So you're the one they're all fighting over? Jamie bristled. I'm not some prize to... Agnes held up a gnarled hand. Not a prize, child. A key. She turned toward the door. Come inside before you freeze. The answers you want won't do you any good if you're dead. The cabin's interior smelled of dried herbs and wood smoke. Dozens of candles flickered on every surface, their light reflecting off glass jars filled with murky liquids. A massive loom dominated one corner, half woven with a tapestry depicting. Jamie squinted. Was that the twisted pine? Agnes shuffled to the fireplace and ladled steaming liquid into a chipped mug. Drink this. It'll help with the shock. Jamie accepted the mug but didn't drink. Help me understand. Why is this happening? Why me? The old woman's gaze drifted to the loom. Because of what sleeps beneath the resort. Because of the pact Victoria's ancestors made to keep it contained. She pointed a bony finger at Jamie. And because you, my dear, are the last living descendant of the woman who first bound it. The mug slipped from Jamie's fingers, shattering on the hardwood floor. Outside, the wind howled like a thing in pain. Somewhere in the distance, a wolf's mournful cry echoed through the mountains. Closer now. Agnes didn't seem surprised when the front door burst open moments later, revealing a bloodied Edward in human form, his clothes torn to shreds, his golden eyes locked onto Jamie with terrifying intensity. You have to go back, he rasped. Jamie shook her head. Are you insane? After what just... It's the solstice. Edward staggered forward, leaving crimson footprints on the floor. Victoria's performing the ritual tonight. If she succeeds, Agnes finished for him, the thing beneath the pine will wake, and this time there'll be no one left to put it back to sleep. Edward reached for Jamie, his hand hovering just shy of touching her. I can't stop her alone. His voice dropped to a whisper. You have to be the one to break this cycle. In the fireplace, the flame suddenly burned an unnatural green. The half-woven tapestry on the loom unraveled thread by thread, the image of the twisted pine dissolving into nothingness. Agnes crossed herself. God help us, she's already begun. The drive back to the resort felt like hurtling toward a nightmare. Jamie sat wedged between Edward and Marcus in the truck's cab, her body vibrating with tension. Edward's wounds had closed unnaturally fast, but blood still matted his dark hair, and his breathing came in ragged bursts. Explain it to me again, Jamie demanded, her voice steadier than she felt. Edward stared out at the dark road. 200 years ago, your ancestor, Martha Monroe, trapped an ancient entity beneath the twisted pine. She bound it using her own bloodline as the lock. His jaw tightened. Victoria's family were the keepers, tasked with maintaining the wards. But somewhere along the way they decided they'd rather control the power than contain it. Marcus took a sharp turn onto the resort's access road. Victoria's figured out how to channel the entity's energy into creating those things you saw tonight. But to fully break the seal, she needs my blood. Jamie's stomach turned. That's why she hired me. That's why all this started when I arrived. Edward's hand found hers in the dark, his touch startlingly warm. You're the last living descendant. Your blood can either reinforce Martha's original seal or shatter it completely. The resort came into view, its windows glowing against the stormy night. Only now Jamie noticed the unnatural pattern to the lights, flares of gold forming symbols in the glass. The entire building pulsed with eerie energy. Marcus parked behind the maintenance shed. We're too late. The ritual's already underway. Edward was out of the truck before it fully stopped moving. Jamie scrambled after him, her boots sinking into fresh snow. The air here tasted metallic, like licking a battery. Listen to me. Edward gripped her shoulders, his golden eyes burning with intensity. Victoria will try to manipulate you. She'll use your fear, your anger, anything to get you to spill blood on that tree's roots. His thumbs brushed her collarbones. No matter what happens, no matter what you see or hear, don't let her draw your blood. A guttural scream tore through the night. They ran toward the sound, emerging into the clearing where the twisted pine stood. The tree looked different now. Its bark blackened, branches writhing like living things. At its base, Victoria knelt in a circle of candles, her emerald dress replaced by a flowing white shift. Spread-eagled before her lay a naked man, his skin carved with intricate runes. Jamie recognized the resort's head groundskeeper, his mouth stretched in a silent scream as vines slithered from the tree to encircle his limbs. Ah! Victoria didn't look up from her work. The gang's all here. Edward stepped forward, his body already beginning to change. Stop this madness, Victoria. You don't know what you're unleashing. Victoria laughed, the sound echoing unnaturally. She raised a silver dagger, its hilt shaped like the pine pendant, and pressed it to the groundskeeper's throat. Oh, I know exactly what I'm doing. The moment the blade bit flesh, the earth trembled. The groundskeeper's body convulsed as his blood hit the roots, black tendrils surging up to consume him whole. The twisted pine groaned, its trunk splitting vertically to reveal a yawning darkness within. Jamie's knees buckled as a wave of pure wrongness washed over her. The air thickened with the stench of rotting earth and copper. Shadows pooled at the tree's base, coalescing into something vaguely humanoid, a figure of smoke and screaming faces. Victoria turned ecstatic eyes on Jamie. "Now, descendant, it's your turn." Edward lunged, his transformation completing mid-leap. But before he could reach Victoria, the shadow creature lashed out, sending him crashing into the snow. Marcus fired his gun, but the bullets passed harmlessly through the entity's form. Victoria advanced on Jamie, dagger gleaming. "Your blood or his?" she purred. "Choose." Behind her, the shadow creature bent over Edward's wolf form, its smoky fingers pressing against his heaving chest. Jamie saw understanding flash in Edward's eyes. This thing wasn't trying to kill him, it was bonding with him. Victoria's blade touched Jamie's throat. Tick-tock. In that moment, Jamie remembered Agnes's words. "You have to be the one to break the cycle." She made her choice. Grabbing Victoria's wrist, Jamie yanked the dagger free and slashed it across her own palm. Blood welled black in the moonlight. Victoria's triumphant scream cut off as Jamie turned and hurled the dagger into the heart of the twisted pine-split trunk. The world exploded. Lightning arced from the sky, striking the tree with deafening force. The shadow creature shrieked, its form unraveling as the pine's branches ignited with blue fire. Jamie fell to her knees, watching as her blood dripped onto the roots, not feeding the darkness but sealing it. Victoria's wail of rage turned to horror as the ground beneath her feet began to glow with intricate runes, Martha Monroe's original wards flaring back to life. The tree's split trunk groaned shut, trapping the entity once more. Edward staggered to Jamie's side as the last of the unnatural fire died. In the sudden silence, only three things remained: the twisted pine, whole again, but scorched, black; Victoria, aged decades and seconds, her white hair fallen out in clumps; and Jamie's blood, seeping into the earth where it would keep the seal intact, for now. As dawn's first light touched the mountains, Edward pulled Jamie close. His voice, when he spoke, held equal parts awe and dread. "It's done, but not over." Above them, a single pine cone dropped from the blackened branches, its scales forming the unmistakable shape of a screaming face. The morning after the ritual dawned brittle and too bright. Jamie sat on the edge of the safe house's lumpy couch, watching dust motes swirl in the sunlight, cutting through the curtains. Her bandaged palm throbbed in time with her heartbeat. Edward moved through the cabin's small kitchen with quiet efficiency, brewing coffee strong enough to stain the air. He'd cleaned up since last night. No more blood matting his dark hair, though fresh scars peeked above his collar where the shadow creature had touched him. "You should drink something." He set a steaming mug on the side table. Jamie stared at the dark liquid. "Is it over?" The silence stretched too long before Edward sat beside her, the couch springs groaning under his weight. "The immediate threat is contained. Victoria's magic is broken." His fingers flexed, claws extending slightly before retracting. But the entity beneath the pine, it's not destroyed, just bound again. A log shifted in the fireplace, sending up a shower of sparks. Jamie studied Edward's profile, the sharp angles of his face, the way his golden eyes tracked invisible movements. What happens now? Before he could answer, the front door burst open. Marcus stood framed in sunlight, his usually immaculate hair disheveled, a folded newspaper clutched in one hand. "You need to see this." The headline screamed in bold print, "Blackwood Pine Resort closes indefinitely after gala tragedy." Below it, a grainy photo showed ambulances lining the resort's circular drive. Jamie's throat tightened. How many died? None, miraculously. Marcus dropped into the armchair. But 17 guests are hospitalized with unexplained trauma. The official story is a gas leak causing mass hallucinations. His eyes flicked to Edward. The pack elders are demanding answers. Edward took the paper, his claws puncturing the edges. "They'll have them when I'm ready." A knock at the door made them all tense. Agnes entered without waiting, her silver braid gleaming. She carried a cloth-wrapped bundle that smelled faintly of earth and herbs. "Dreamt about you last night," she said to Jamie, unwrapping the bundle to reveal Martha Monroe's journal, the original one they'd found hidden in the resort's walls. The brittle pages fell open to an illustration that hadn't been there before. The twisted pine, its roots forming a perfect circle around two figures, one dark, one light, their hands clasped above a pool of blood. Agnes tapped the image. The bond's only half sealed. For it to hold, the guardian needs his anchor. Edward went very still. No. Jamie looked between them. What does that mean? Agnes's milky eyes held pity. Martha didn't just bind the entity. She bound a protector to watch over it, a wolf with just enough of the darkness inside him to keep the balance. She nodded to Edward. His bloodline has carried that burden for generations. The truth settled over Jamie like snowfall. That's why you wanted the resort, not for business, to protect the seal. Edward's jaw worked. And why Victoria wanted you? The guardian needs his anchor, a living descendant of Martha's blood, to complete the bond. His gaze burned into hers. If you what? Jamie's pulse roared in her ears. Mate, Agnes supplied bluntly, properly, under the pine during the full moon. She patted Jamie's knee. Don't look so horrified, child. The magic does most of the work. Marcus whistled low. Well, that explains why Victoria was so hell-bent on keeping you apart. Jamie stood abruptly, the room tilting. She needed air, needed space, needed to not be surrounded by people discussing her supernatural marriage like it was a business transaction. The porch creaked under her weight. The mountain air smelled of coming snow, crisp and clean compared to the cabin's cloying herbs. Behind her, the door opened and shut with deliberate quiet. Edward leaned against the railing, his broad shoulders blocking the wind. You should know. It doesn't have to be you. There might be other descendants. Jamie watched a hawk circle over the valley. Are there? Silence. She turned to face him. The morning light caught the gold in his eyes, making them glow like banked embers. How long have you known? About you? Edward exhaled sharply. Since the moment you walked into the resort lobby. Your scent ... His claws pricked the wooden railing. It called to me like nothing ever has. The admission hung between them, raw and undeniable. Jamie remembered the way her skin had prickled when they first met, the dreams she'd written off as stress, visions of running through snow on four legs, of teeth at her throat that never quite broke skin. Inside, Agnes's voice carried through the thin walls. Tell them to prepare the ritual site. The full moon's in 3 days. Edward's hand found hers, their fingers slotting together with terrifying rightness. When he spoke, his voice was rough with something more than duty. "Whatever you choose, Jamie. I'll respect it." But the bond between them already hummed with inevitability, as deep and ancient as the roots beneath the twisted pine. And Jamie knew. Some choices had been made long before either of them were born. In the valley below, the first winter snow began to fall. The full moon hung heavy over the mountains, its silver light transforming the snow into a sea of diamonds. Jamie stood at the edge of the clearing, her breath fogging in the frigid air. The twisted pine loomed before her, its scorched branches now dusted with fresh snow, a grotesque parody of holiday cheer. Edward moved silently beside her, his bare feet leaving no prints in the snow. He wore only a pair of loose linen pants, his torso crisscrossed with scars that gleamed pale in the moonlight. The cold didn't seem to touch him. "You're sure about this?" His voice was deeper than usual, roughened by the change already stirring in his blood. Jamie tightened the wool cloak Agnes had given her. Beneath it, she wore only a simple white shift. Traditional, the old woman had said, for bonding rituals. The fabric whispered against her skin like ghostly fingers. "No," Jamie admitted, "but we're doing it anyway." A chorus of howls erupted from the surrounding woods. Edward's pack, stationed at the cardinal points to guard the ritual. Their voices raised the hair on Jamie's arms, not from fear, but from some primal recognition deep in her bones. Agnes emerged from the trees, her footsteps impossibly silent for someone who needed a cane. She carried a wooden bowl filled with dark liquid that steamed despite the cold. "Time," she announced, setting the bowl at the base of the pine. Edward's hand found Jamie's, his claws carefully sheathed. Together they stepped into the clearing, the snow crunching underfoot. As they approached the tree, Jamie noticed new details. The way its bark seemed to pulse faintly, the eerie whistling sound coming from within its trunk, like wind through a hollow bone. Agnes dipped her fingers into the bowl. "Blood calls to blood," she intoned, painting a sigil on Edward's chest. "Bone to bone, spirit to spirit." When she turned to Jamie, the liquid smelled of copper and something earthy. "Your blood sealed the darkness. Now it will bind the light." The moment the cold mixture touched Jamie's forehead, the world tilted. Her vision doubled. She saw the clearing as herself, but also through Edward's eyes, the colors sharper, the sense overwhelming. She felt his heartbeat alongside hers, a frantic staccato that slowly synchronized. Edward gasped, his pupils dilating until only a thin ring of gold remained. "I can feel you," he rasped. "Every thought, every breath." Agnes stepped back. The vows. Edward dropped to one knee in the snow, his head bowed. When he spoke, his voice held the weight of centuries. "I am the guardian of the threshold, the watcher in the wood. I pledge my blood to yours, my strength to your protection, my life to your keeping." He looked up, and Jamie saw the wolf staring back at her through human eyes. "From this moon until the last." Jamie's hands trembled as she reached for him. The words came unbidden, as if whispered into her ear by the wind itself. "I am the anchor in the storm, the keeper of the seal. I pledge my blood to yours, my will to your purpose, my life to your survival." Her fingers brushed his stubbled cheek. "From this moon until the last." Agnes pressed the ritual dagger into Jamie's hand, the same one Victoria had used, now purified in salt and moonlight. The final step. Edward bared his throat in utter submission. Jamie's hand steadied as she pressed the blade to the juncture of his neck and shoulder. A thin red line welled up, the scent of his blood rich and intoxicating. When it was Edward's turn, his claws extended with aching slowness. He cradled Jamie's wrist like something precious, his eyes never leaving hers as he made the shallow cut. The pain was brief, eclipsed by the electric shock of their mingled blood dripping onto the pine's roots. The earth trembled. Blue fire raced up the tree's trunk, illuminating symbols carved centuries ago. The wind howled through the branches, carrying voices Jamie almost recognized. Edward pulled her close as the ground beneath them glowed with intricate runes, not just around the pine, but spreading outward in a vast network that encompassed the entire resort. "The original wards," Edward murmured against her hair. "You woke them up?" Agnes's laughter was young and bright, belying her aged face. "Oh, it's more than that, boy. Look." The scorch marks on the pine were healing, blackened bark, given way to fresh growth. Tiny green buds unfurled along its twisted branches, impossibly vibrant against the winter landscape. Jamie pressed a hand to the tree. Warmth pulsed beneath her palm, steady and strong, a heartbeat not entirely of this world, but no longer threatening, balanced. Edward's arms encircled her from behind, his chin resting on her head. Through the new bond humming between them, Jamie felt his wonder mirror her own. "It's not gone," she realized aloud. "No," Edward agreed, "but it's at peace, and so are we." High above, the moon shone down on the newly verdant pine, its branches now cradling the first delicate snowflakes of the coming storm. The resort's lights twinkled in the distance, waiting, and for the first time in 200 years, the guardian and his anchor stood together, not as prisoner and jailer, but as partners. The snow began in earnest as they walked back, hand in hand, toward the future. Weeks later, the resort thrived under new ownership, and the disappearances ceased. But deep in the woods, where the ashes of the twisted pine smoldered, something clawed its way up from the earth. It wore a familiar face, Victoria's, and its smile was a promise. "Mates are fragile things," it crooned to the night, "and I do so love to break them."